Welcome to Activate Your Life, Awaken Your Soul's Expression. This is the podcast that goes deep into the realms of astrology, human design, homesteading, permaculture, self-sufficiency, inner work, and inner healing, everything that's supporting your own inner awakening. I am your host, Erin Esser, and it is an honor to be your guide on this amazing journey of self-discovery and transformation. Hey everyone, welcome to Activate Your Life. I am your host, Erin Esser, and today we have Kyle Anthony Trautmann with us, and I'm so excited to have him. He is the CEO and Lead Facilitator at High Vibe Healing. His work within the health industry has spanned across a myriad of topics over the last 10 years. All of those subjects revolving around regenerative principles with one goal in mind, and that is to maximize vitality through all aspects of energy production. Kyle started his career in 2013 as a nutritionist and slowly built his practice around how regenerative agriculture benefits the mitochondrial matrix. Kyle co-founded High Vibe Healing in 2016 with an emphasis of nutritional bioenergetics. Since 2016, Kyle has added varied dynamics to High Vibe Healing in order to address and alleviate the main causes of CDR, which is cell danger response, which is conserved metabolic response that shuts off the production of the energy molecule ATP from the mitochondria. Kyle's focus over the last 4 years has been studying the mass influx of chronic disease and how the 7 types of traumas have a direct impact on the functioning of our mitochondria and how we utilize energy as a whole for health and well-being. His work as of late has been focused on alleviating these traumas through a process known as Holonomic energy harmonization, which focuses on how to consistently produce an ample amount of energy to have a robust and rich human experience. And I will put all of Kyle's links in the show notes below. But that was so much, and I loved it. And I just welcome you, Kyle, to the show. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super stoked to be here. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. And, I started working with you, I want to say maybe it was in March of this year. And I don't even know how I ended up on some of your posts. We had some mutual friends, and the things you talked about, I just thought, this guy gets it. Like, he's so grounded in his approach to not only nutrition, but spirituality, trauma, and the energetics of all of it, and how we, really as a whole, need to show up as our whole selves. And so often in the spiritual community, right, we just kind of focus on different aspects, right, rather than bridging it all and, bringing it all together. And so I love your approach, and I love how grounded you are in your approach, because sometimes spirituality can get a little too, out there and a little too airy-fairy. And where it's like, okay, yes. And there's also this too, right? So I love that. So I just, wanted to chat with you a little bit kind of about your approach, these 7 types of trauma, and just really how we can, what do we want to dig into today so that we can help activate people's lives that are listening?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely appreciate the kind words. The biggest thing that I really, really emphasize when I explain any of my process or just anything that I do is just keep it simple, right? Is that if we can keep things as elementary as possible for people to understand, and that was the foundational aspects and foundational time frame of when we were really, really, truly learning at a really high rate within how much our neurology was developing, people can start to understand that we can take these complex, really high-end concepts intellectually, break them down, and still give them potency without having to dilute that potency. So what's really helpful is that if you keep things in analogy form, numerical form, and very, very elementary form, people can learn faster. They can learn with more ease, and they can learn with more fun. And obviously neuroscience has proven through childhood development that obviously if we take more of a fun, animated, joyous approach, we learn and unlearn faster. And the older we get, it's more challenging for us to unlearn, right? Because we have this like really interesting middle ground of hardwiring that happens right around 34, 35, 36. And that's not to alarm people. I'm just giving people the metrics of what it actually takes to understand what are you doing in this life? What do you need to know in this life? But then also through this process, what are the intangibles just on an energy aspect? Do you have energy literacy so you understand how to really activate your life, And that's really all we are here to do, is just give you the education in simple form. So you have a practicum that's very, very easy on the system. It's very gentle. And then you can go back to the playground. It's our biggest focus.
I love that. And even, your approach, the sessions that we've worked together on, it is so much centered around play. Like you don't dive so much, like we go there to those places under the surface, right? But we don't dwell there. And I think that there's that beautiful balance that you bring into your work where it's like, okay, we got to go there and we have to like scoop up and see what we need to see. But now we can leave and we don't have to stay in this space because it's really benefiting the process. And we don't have to do that, right? Where I think sometimes it can be like, oh, I must suffer in order to heal, and there's this belief around that, I must have 1,000 dark nights of the soul and they have to be so intense where, and I don't want to lighten that because I've definitely had several dark nights of the soul myself. And I feel like they will spontaneously, naturally occur if we just allow the process of them. And we don't have to stay in that space where like you bring play and that childlike aspect of like, okay, how do you want to feel? Now let's encode that in your body and, through color and through sound and through all of the different, ways that you do that. So I appreciate that approach.
Yeah. And you said the word, which was balance. So if you look at harmony, which is kind of more something that I resonate with outside of just the word balance, but it kind of has a very, synchronized and synonym basis in its definition, is that harmony in the terms of definition that we use is consistency. Right. So if you have a consistent output of energy and you know exactly the metrics of what you need to hit, what you're working with, it becomes more of an ease. Right. And then we teach, what's really beautiful about this too, is that we teach the analytical discernment. We really help bolster the analytical developments within our Foundations of the Mind course. So you actually have more of an understanding of how to utilize your mental power. Right. So it's like, yes, we're taking the childlike aspect, the animation, the play, but we're also rooted in like, we also have to be very smart with how we're making our executive decisions, because this world is a little relentless. Nature isn't this, oh, hey, we're just perfect all the time. Like she's a ruthless son of a bitch. You know what I mean? And if we don't respect that process by developing our mind, we can get swayed by our emotions, right? And if we're making decisions out of temporary feelings, we can have a massive and in my humble opinion, a very drastic and unfortunate impact on people that we care about. So when we have fun, right, we can stay in that pocket, but then also at the same time, we're more energy efficient. So we can just get back to our lives, because it's really challenging, especially speaking on the dark night of the soul. A lot of people who are very, very conscious or become more self-aware as they get older, whenever that time hits for them, they'll be like, yeah, I've had this process, right? Cycles. They keep moving in and out. They move in and out. But our main focus is, appreciate it. Appreciate the pain too, accentuate through the pain through play. And that is where I think we start. And we're not trying to separate ourselves from people, but within the marketplace, we want to be able to have this really grounded approach where you can actually play in the pain. And when you know how to do that. Yep. And then when you have that fully embodied, it's just a beautiful experience in my humble opinion.
What I got a visual when you said that, and it was really about like, when we're feeling that pain, even acting it out, like dramatize that, right? Like even through movement, maybe even through, we can call it dance if we want, I'm in human design, I'm emotionally defined. And I always tell people too, like that are in that space, like use music as your cue of like if I'm in a low part of my wave, like really in that emotional space, I know I'm not going to make decisions. I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait through things. But what I want to, like a Leonard Cohen song, I'm going to sit and like listen to, like, because that's the space I'm in. So I can move in that energy, right? Because it's moving through me, right? And so I can allow that and the similar frequency to like move through me, versus like when I'm at the high part of my wave, it's kind of like Katrina and the sunshine, like I'm walking on sunshine kind of thing, right? And so it's like everything is great and wonderful. And so moving in that vibration, so moving with the energy, but not like attaching to it. Because I think when we move with it, then we're not like holding on to it, right? Because we're allowing it to move through us. And so I love that. I love that that visual as well that you gave to just kind of like play with that, play with the pain. How can we do that, right?
Interesting concept, right? Interesting concept.
And it's probably scary for a lot of people too, right? Yeah. Because a lot of people don't want to feel the pain, right? So how do we play with it versus stuffing it down, or, you know what I mean? And so that's the challenge of like, oh, I'm feeling this, right? And I think that we have to have a certain level of emotional awareness in order to even get to that space.
Yeah. And it's temporary. The beautiful part about this is, I mean, in the simplicity of it, but the concepts are always easy to understand. Always. But the practicum is always going to be the challenge, because then you have the consistency, and there's harmonization again, is that you start to understand that pain is temporary. So if it's temporary, why aren't we still playing in it? You know what I mean? Like that for me started to just click in my neurons and started just firing this concept in this practicum, where it's just like, if it's already temporary, it's going to end at some point, to revisit a new cycle for a new beginning or freshness, however you want to, exemplify your journey, right? Through words. Yeah. It's still going to be temporary. It's going to come to an end before you can come to that fruition of what that end piece looks like. So while you're in there, why not get a reward for it? And the reward has got to be in the play. I don't know many people that are getting rewards out here that are not just playing. They're like, oh yeah, well, I got a reward for white knuckling myself. I'm like, yeah, how did that feel? Right. Yeah. And if we're doing everything based off of feeling better or feeling less than, which is essentially still feeling better at the end of the day, why aren't we just playing through that process? So I think really accentuating the childlike mindset with still a full mental tenacity towards the approach, and being relentless towards loving yourself. Right. That is the biggest thing, because I've found through not only just extensive research and just obviously going through many modalities and creating my own, is that every single thing is really predicated on just forgiveness. Right. How can you forgive yourself? Can you let go of things? Can you surrender to the process and allow your neurology, which knows every single beautiful thing about you and every deep, dark secret that you want to hold on to, if you just let it do its work by surrendering your association to those things outside of yourself, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
So in your experience and in your knowing, how do people do that?
I mean, honestly, how people do it, I mean, this is super, super subjective when it comes down to each individual. But like when they come into our facilitation, it's just very simple steps. Like I love asking questions, right? So when we have our 15 to 20 technique flow sequence, we want to understand where you're at, where you're trying to go, and then how to get there in the middle ground. Because flow state always says that your first bout is with beta brainwave. You have to fight your body's propensity to want to run, get away from the situation, go get a drink, go get distracted, right? Go do all these things that are just trying to keep you away from the work that needs to be done. And then once we can get you in that slight alpha pocket where you're just slowly letting go of the identity, which is associated with your body, your title, your job, your occupation, your role as a wife or a husband or a father or a mother. And then when we get you there, you start to healthfully disassociate from your material attachment. And your material attachment is just through the senses. And then we can keep you in that beautiful modulated state between alpha and like a higher grade of theta brainwave. We can start to track and trace the specific imprints that are starting to code these programs. And these programs come in these I am statements, I can't or can statements, I don't, I won't statements, these things that are keeping you hostage based off of your nervous system saying like, hey, what are you actually doing? Like, I'm here to love you. I'm here to serve you. You literally, like the nervous system, the greatest pharmacy on the planet. Like what is getting in the way here? Right. So when we teach people the act of surrender, or as I like to say, just the art of forgiveness, is just follow the cadence within these questions. And right when we get right about like the 6th, 7th, or 8th technique, people are like, they're fully suspended and they're free. They're free because they're not attached to anything within their identity. And that, in my humble opinion, through all the modalities, all the research that we've done, is when the neurology is like, oh, hey, Erin's out of the way. Cool. How fast can we clean this up? How fast can we rewrite this real quick before she comes back to? And when she comes back to, then she's got to operate as Erin through this world, this 3D holographic universe. And that is what's so beautiful about that benevolent intelligence that runs our autonomic nervous system. It's there to just simply heal you at all times. And that's where I think people get stuck, is they're like, I get identified with having to heal all the time.
Yeah.
I have to heal. It's my healing journey. I'm like, cool, that's great. I mean, that's a great marketplace and a great market cap for what you're talking about. But if you just be and you learn to suspend the senses, the healing happens naturally. It's just part of the greatest design that we've been ever given, in my humble opinion. So that's the best way I can answer that question, when people learn that art and that power, essentially, because it's about self-empowerment, and that is a very high oscillated frequency and non-egoic at the same time. Because when you feel self-empowered, you just want to give. You're just naturally in that giving state, and you're like, I don't need any resources because I got the greatest resources. It's within me. So once people understand that education and then the practicum within the simplicity, then they're like, whoa, where can I go with this? Like, how much fun can I have?
I love that. And what speaks to me in that is, what I hear in that is, and you said the egoic stuff, it is really like moving that aside, like how we're identifying with our wounding, how we're identifying with all of these hats that we're wearing, right? Yeah. And then the beliefs around all those hats that we're wearing, all of those things, when we can like kind of put that to sleep, so to speak, or like move that aside, to go in and dig in and to kind of get this visual of like rewiring like a car engine, right? Like while the hood's open, in a sense, before that hood closes again, to go, oh, okay, I can do this. And I'm running now in a little different way. That's interesting, right? Like the car engine is maybe a little bit softer now. It's like a purring versus a clanking now as I'm turning the corner, right? And so, and one of the things in the spiritual community as well, too, I just had a conversation this morning about this a little bit, is the ego, right? And so many people I've heard it, over the years, it's like death to the ego, right? Like we must kill the ego and have no identity at all, right? And it's interesting to me because my first program that I created back in 2016, I realized this about myself. I'm like, it's not about killing the ego. It's about like the ego for me. And it'd be interesting to see if this resonates with you and what your thoughts are on this. The ego to me is part of my own, it's like the inner children that are coming up. And it's like there's an aspect is trying to protect me from what it's afraid of, right? And so what I would tell my clients, I'm like, okay, when something comes up and you're pushing your edge a little bit and that voice comes in and it's like, oh my God, what are you doing? What they're going to think you're crazy, or you can't do this, or whatever that is, right? Or oh, you're a mom, what are you thinking? Or, a parent should, all those things that come up, those beliefs, right? The programs that come up, right? That is like really reinforcing that identity. It's like, it's there to protect us because it's just afraid. It's like a scared little child, And so when we can talk to it, so I would tell my clients, like, just say, when you recognize those things, just be like, hey, I see you here. And I know that you're just trying to protect me here, but I don't need you here right now. I'm good. And just really like be gentle with it rather than trying to like murder it, and like, so I don't know. I just like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's partnership. Like the ego is there for a very, very, very important reason. It's to keep you alive. Yeah. Right. So one, if you kill your ego, like this is the reason why shit gets ridiculous when people talk about that. And I'm very also like tenacious when I speak sometimes about, because it's not like I'm trying to cut through what people's opinions are, because one of the biggest things that we've learned, obviously in our research for the cell danger response, one of the depletions of energy as a whole is trying to literally prove your opinion as to be right. Right. But when I hear things like that, I'm like, why would you ever want to kill your ego when your ego is there for the most basic survival functions of your entire being? Because if it wasn't there, you actually wouldn't be there. Right. So this is what's really fascinating when it comes down to that notion, is because the ego is built within this notion of how is it associating itself with the environment. Right. What is the salience network? What is your nucleus accumbens? What is your hippocampus and your amygdala literally protruding in this environment from the internal unit of your brain circuitry? And what's really fascinating is people speak on the spiritual side, right? But if we look at like brain anatomy and actually what's happening within the system just to keep you alive and all the survival functions and cell signaling that actually has to happen, you need your ego. You just need to know how to be partners with it. You need to know how to hold hands with it. You need to know how to say no and yes to it, right? You need to have healthy analytical discernment. And that's what we do, I believe, a really great job in helping our community within the foundations of the mind, our mental course, because we have to focus on the three minds, right? You have the neocortex, the thinking mind, the frontal lobe, 40% plus of the brain volume, right? I always call it the CEO of executive decision making, right? You have to use your willpower, right? But it's 0.006 to 5% of your entire bandwidth when it comes down to awareness. So where is all the rest of that, right? You have subcortical faculties within the limbic system, the hypothalamus, the amygdala. These main drivers known as the feeling mind are also known as the subconscious because it is nonverbal. But that little doorway that no one wants to talk about called the brainstem, right? The analytical discernment, the analytical ability to be like, oh yeah, like you're speaking this. Awesome. Beautiful. Love that. But also at the same time, it's not even just about resonance. Is like, does that actually make sense? Does that make sense in a sensory world, right? And it doesn't. To kill your ego would be the most foolish thing that you can do, because one, it's the greatest part about you to allow you to even move through space, to allow you to get out of bed, to allow you to take a shower, to allow you to brush your teeth. So
to create.
Boom. And then you have to align yourself. That's another reason why we call it harmonization, with the deeper portion of spirit in itself, the autonomic nervous system, to start to utilize your neocortex of what that visual looks like. And that's the expression on the pineal gland, right? Like, what is that big instrument that can put out these deep visions? And I think I love what you said too, because it's that entrapment essentially of the child. Because when you have that time frame of 0 to 6, egocentrism in psychology, that is where your foundational learning is coming from the environment, right? So your ego is literally starting to be like, oh, cool. How do I do all this patchwork to understand what it means to be an adult? And for some reason, people, as soon as they hit like 27, 28, 29, 30, they're like, oh my gosh, if I'm conscious and I'm self-aware through that Saturn return, I'm going to start to unravel all this stuff because it's not serving me. I'm hurting people. And that's when you start to see these deeper reservoirs of empathy, towards not only yourself, towards people that, have wronged you, but they didn't have the same information that we do, in today's age. But to kill your ego is, like I said, it's the most foolish thing you can do. You got to learn how to be a partner with it and not let it override you, just like anything else. Because if you can't fast even from your ego, you're a slave to it. And if you're a slave to your ego, you're going to look for cheap dopamine out in the world. And that's gonna, don't get me started on neurotransmitters. And that's where it really starts to become, mental enslavement for yourself, right? So you want to just really know how to harmonize and do psychosomatic dialogue so you can build that healthy partnership, being like, hey, where are we going today?
I love that. And it speaks so much to right now. Yesterday, the astrology world, the nodes shifted from Taurus into North Node shifted into Aries, and South Node is in Libra. And how I'm seeing that, like just you saying that, is like Aries is the head, but it's only part of the head. It's the eyes and like the upper part of the head. And so it's like, but it's embodiment as well too, right? So it's like, I feel that you say mental enslavement. I feel that is like a shadow aspect where we might we might see a lot of that come up in the next year and a half. And this whole, of like people starting to either recognize how they're mentally enslaving themselves, right? And realizing like how they have to like coordinate and getting into the body as well, and not just letting that run amok, right? And so that they can see a little different perspective. And I'm already even seeing that within myself, like just awarenesses around like thoughts and where I'm like, oh my gosh, and just realizing like the really getting grounded and doing those practices that really bring me into this now moment, right? Like in the space here and now to get into that flow space, to get out of that. So I feel like this is such an important topic. And I feel like this next year and a half, people are really going to be very alert to the fact of their own need for integration, and embodiment of who they are, and just showing up in a more authentic way for themselves too, and how they're showing up in the world.
And showing up, period. Like, I mean, what's beautiful about mending all these things is I love people who talk from metaphysical standpoints. They give a lot of terminology when it comes down to this, but it's like I was raised, in the inner suburbs, right? So it's like, how do you take spirit, streets, and science and mix it together? And it's just like, you just got to show up. Like, I mean, regardless of what's happening in life, I mean, if you love what you're doing and you have a deep drive for people or purpose, like you just got to show up. Like, you got to figure it out for yourself to become the best person. Like, that's where it's like, we call it like cutting the cheese, is like, we don't have to get soft around these notions. Like, you have an ultimate respect for what people are really passionate about, whether that be astrology, Reiki, all these amazing tools that are out there. But at the end of the day, you still have to act. Right. Yes. You have to come to self-awareness, and you still have to do something about it. Yes. Right. And I think that's what's really, really important about what you're talking about in the next grand cycle, which is that 18-month period, because 1 + 8 is 9, and that's the fulfillment of one full cycle. Mm-hmm. So now you're starting in the numerical sense, right? So we can go and play this metaphysical ping pong or pinball all over the place, but you still have to act. Like, that's where I tell people, like, especially in the trauma physiology, and we can bleed into, the 7 types of trauma just with this segue. But the biggest thing that has helped me understand where people are is like, what more education do you need? Right? What else do you need to just act? Right. And I started to find out, and I was teaching this in a curriculum 2 weeks ago. I was like, you have to understand, over educating yourself is a flight response. You're still avoiding something because you're not acting on what internally needs to be worked on. And that's the biggest thing that I think is helping a lot of people within our facilitation, is you're like, oh, wow, it's matter of fact. Like, if we just do it, it gets done. Right. And the results is through the action. Like, we can philosophize, conceptualize all these processes. But when it really comes down to, hey, are you going to show up, and can you be consistent? Because your life is comprised of what you do and what you don't do. And if you can do it really, really well consistently, and some days you have some off days, but you still show up, that is like that boxer mentality where it's like, that person's going to be training for the grand prize. So it's like, for me, I really love teaching people this notion of just mental tenacity, and just don't be an asshole through the process, right? Because you want to respect where people are at, whether it's new age, whether it's woo-woo, whatever your perception of what people are doing, it still comes down to brass tacks. Are you going to show up, and are you going to do it? Right.
It's such an Aries perspective too. It's like beautiful for this 18 months. It really is. It's just kind of like, you're going to show up and get over some of your shit. Like, sometimes you just got to show up. Like, well, no, all the time you just got to show up. And sometimes it's like you're saying, not getting so soft. It's like, and knowing that, like, there's those days that you hit it, like, where, it might not be as strong as it is yesterday or 2 days ago, but you're still showing up and you're doing something, right? Exactly. And you're tuning into what you need in that. And that's what builds courage within ourselves. And that's what builds confidence, which is all an Aries, like, traits. And so when we keep showing up, bravado, then we can count on ourselves. And that's the biggest thing. We don't trust life because we don't show up consistently. When we start to show up consistently, we start to trust life more because we're trusting ourselves more. I mean, that's been my experience. And so I feel like that is going to be a big lesson for a lot of people, like, in this time frame. I mean, all of us on some levels, right? Some, in different ways. And that's going to be powerful, I feel, in different ways. It's like, how are we showing up? Like you're saying, how are you doing it? How are you taking action in all of these things? Because that's what it's going to come down to.
And that is beautiful in a sense. And what I've found through my own personal experience, when you consistently do that, you just want to keep giving. And it's really tough to do that in times of scarcity. I mean, like, the world right now, because we're in a grand convergence with geopolitical aspects, agriculture aspects, financial aspects, all these things, human conflict, war, all kind of like merging in between that 81-year and 170-year cycle. It's really challenging, especially with how much distractions we have in this world, to just want to give and not take, right? It's almost like a distraction and taking economy. So when you can show up and you can and be honest with yourself and just persevere through that consistency, there's this natural take that I realize more so with all the people that I work with that are extremely self-aware. They just want to love and give. right? They want to love and give. And the more they give, the more love they get back. And then it's just this cycle of just awesomeness that keeps percolating, on this slow drip feed of just like, how much can I squeeze out of the purpose of life, right? And the fact that you're a miracle that we're sitting here doing this, just talking, is a prime example of why you should be giving on a consistent basis, because whatever you give, it's going to come back to you tenfold. You just won't see it the exact perfect way that you see it unless you're doing the visualization, the creative imagery, and the mental rehearsal. That's why we teach that. And it's like, look, get detailed with what you love in life. It's not like you want, what do you desire? What sets your life on fire? Because why aren't you doing it? If we know through the metrics in neuroscience that it's 5 times more restorative than sleep to have a non-sleep deep rest routine, which is mental rehearsal, meditation, yoga nidra, creative imagery, or some form of visualization, why aren't you doing it? Why do you not love yourself enough to show up for yourself at least for 15 minutes a day and play the visual out in your mind, to be able to start to hardwire the neurology that can show up in space? Like everything, it's always as within, so without. No, I don't hear people go into this process and say, so without, so within, right? You don't hear that first. It's always as within, so without. So now, how many people throughout your life that you've studied from, how many teachers, how many educators, how many courses, how many practitioners do you need to work with to realize that they're all saying the exact same thing?
It is. Same thing, different package, maybe a different color bow,
different spices. I like to call it different spices. We're all just developing different dishes and trying to serve, the community and also just, the populace en masse.
Yeah, but it all goes to the same place, inside of us, right? Like that's where it starts, right? So
it's the consumption, yeah.
Well, I'd love to be able to, I know, we talk about the 7 types of trauma, and I'd like to touch on those a little bit just to kind of bring awareness to people. And so I would love to have you share what are those 7 types of trauma and how does that show up, in each one of our lives?
Absolutely. So the first one that we really focus on is kind of one of the micro compounding aspects. A lot of people, if you haven't heard of the notion of the compounding effect, is things that incremental stack up over time will start to show and bear fruit later. Right. And one of the biggest ones that people don't understand is adverse pre-onset experiences, or called APOs. Right. And these are essentially like the onset of a specific chronic illness or disease that often really begins with one or more triggering and compounding traumatic events. Because remember, your nervous system is what perceives things as being traumatic or moments of overwhelm. It's not actually your neocortex, right? So your mind acts like a magnet and it imprints things from the environment and then starts to compartmentalize selective experiences and compounds them on the initial imprint. Right. So when you start to create a neural pathway, it's based off your thought is the repetition. It drives the depth of the neural pathway. And the more expansion of the feeling starts to create the width of the neural pathway. Right. It's starting to create like a mood highway. Right. It's kind of really fascinating. So when these compounded triggers, start to onset and they're sudden, these triggers can tend to form these thoughts that are not only just psychological, they can be physical, but they can be just these forms of exposure to toxins in the environment. Because when people don't realize, when your body is in that state of full weakness, not just vulnerability, because of these APOs, these adverse pre-onset experiences, it's almost like you have the castle, right? And then the drawbridge comes down. And then everything from the environment is like, oh, well, we're welcome in. Let's go find a home. Let's find the host. Let's start to wreak havoc on the system. And these are little things that can be like arguments over time on a consistent basis, consistent triggers of just like loud, non-expressive volatility to the system as well. And what that means is just people who get extremely triggered just by loud noises, right? And these are very subtle things, but you also have to understand that people don't realize you have 2 main driving biological fears. This has been proven since 2016, that you have this fear of loud noises, right? It's your salience network understanding where you are in safety. But then also you have the fear of falling down. It's part of your proprioceptive nervous system to understand where you are in space, to have an equilibrium for your balance, right? Everything else is programmed, and these are built on adverse pre-onset experience. That's the first one. That's like the main one. So and they don't have to be big triggers at all. They can be somebody just running around a wall or a corner of a store and like scare you. right? When you're coming down an aisle, it can be something that has happened over time. And that could be triggered from you watching a scary movie when you were like 5 years old, right? It's really, really, your entire being is so resilient, but it's so fragile. Like it picks up because your neurology, one of the main compasses and processes specifically of the subconscious mind is to record everything that has happened in your life. It doesn't stop, right? So when you have to address this trigger, it has to start to show up. Okay, well, I understand the association, which is in the environment. And then I'm starting to understand, well, how do I override that? And that's through the law of repetition and also what we do within our subconscious dynamic sessions. And then you have to just know the metrics of how much work you have to put in, because it's imperative for healing to understand these little micro triggers. And these could be just like, oh, you're going to your in-laws. You're like, oh, like my mother-in-law, right? That is called an adverse pre-onset experience, right? And what's really fascinating about the adverse pre-onset experiences is they can be very minute or they can be huge. And this is where you start to get into the complex post-traumatic stress disorders, where it's like really massive things have happened, like just massively. And we're talking, I've worked with a couple of people that post-military, this is what's happened, where you've had massive things, like really massive sensory experiences compounded over time, right? And that's where it can be really, really small, or it could be really, really large. That's the main one. And the big thing that I tell people is they all build on adverse life experiences. And these are ales, not to short trigger type of beer, right? But this notion is that people don't realize that anything that's triggered from an onset from chronic illness or chronic disease, it started gradually, right? And things over time is the reason why 40 to 60% of people with chronic fatigue syndrome have adverse life experiences just harbored within the nervous system. And these are technically calculated with any conflict after your 18th birthday, right? So we have increments of 0 to 2 that we focus on, 2 to 6. And then we also go 6 to 13. And then we also go all the way from 13 to 18 and then 18 to 27. Because in our facilitation, especially through my research, people doesn't matter if you're male or female, your neocortex can mature at different times through different environments and obviously through the law of gender. But emotionally, we don't actually start maturing until we're about 28. And that's so perfect that, astrology says, here's your Saturn return. Go figure out your shit, right? Right. Yep. Unless you were built in a pristine, childhood environment, which I don't really know anybody that has, especially those that I've worked with, including myself, has had that to the point where they actually have had to backtrack and go back in time and clean out the things. So adverse life experiences, the second one, starts to just show what's happening after 18, right? And the big one that a lot of people don't understand too, which is so important, and this is for all the parents out there, is adverse childhood relationship experiences. These are also known as ACRs. And these literally happen most often when parents, guardians, and anyone else in the supervision role throughout the development of a child's life, have difficulty connecting or supporting them through insightful attention, kindness, care, and just thoughtful listening, like truly active listening. And this is where it can be, a pastor, right? It can be obviously mom and dad, but any type of guardianship, essentially. This could be a daycare provider.
Teacher, maybe.
Exactly. You got to be very, very keen and very careful with where your children are at, right? Who you are allowing them to surround. And there's obviously this big notion of the sound of freedom that has come out, and the child sex trafficking. I mean, this is it right here. Adverse childhood relationship experiences are extremely important. You got to do your research of who you're surrounding your children with, right? Well, and there's a great documentary. Go ahead. I
was going to say, it just brings up, I also would too, work with parents and coaching them, on connecting with their children and stuff too. And so much of it is them as parents. And I had to do this myself and still, go through it. Our children will bring out any unhealed wounds that we have still left lingering. And I feel like it's one of the greatest catalysts to our healing as parents, if we choose to accept that, that call. But I think that's why it's so important for parents to do that healing work so that their child can feel safe, because I feel like it's just all about are you providing a safe space for your child in all ways, right? And are you tuned in and aware? But if so many parents, right, if they're still walking, you know what I mean, doing their thing, they're not even
walking children. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just, in adult bodies, but they're children, and I think that's why it's so important, for parents to, go on your healing journey, man.
and I can extend this olive branch to people out there is like, if you're going to have a child, like have it intently, right? Like really, really, really nurture that as this is the reason why we're in union. This is the reason why we're doing this, because bleeding into the fourth one that we're going to talk about is adverse childhood experiences. There's too many kids being raised specifically in families that are just broken because they were oops babies. I was one of them. I was the condom broke child, right? And I bursted onto the scene because God had a plan, right? But the thing is, I was not conceived out of desire. I was not conceived out of this notion of this is what I want. So, that fight that a child has to go through just to formulate themselves specifically in this world of absolute distraction and chaos sometimes is you will set the bar higher for a child when you're just like, I'm ready to have this child. I'm ready to have this partner that I really, really, not only resonate with, but, I'm soul connected to. Let's do this and let's bring in this beautiful miracle, because literally, seeing an unfazed child, no vaccines, no nothing, no anything, like just brought into this world with pure love and safety is God's gift right now. It's so challenging to see. What one of the main reasons of why we work within our facilitation is because we want to educate families to not put their children through the systems that are just built on just the pharmaceutical aspects of just this enslavement. And don't quote me on this. The last research that I did, I believe, was 78 shots are now marked within the first 18 months of life. And I'm like, for what?
It's a lot.
Like, it's just for what? And this is the reason why, if you're out here and you have a broken marriage or a broken, relationship within yourself, and then you're going to go have a kid and then have the kid go through the system like that. It's just, not only do you have a fractured, childhood experiences because you don't have, proper adults to take care of you. They're not there to nurture you and guard you and protect you. But then you're also putting through the system of toxicity, and those kids don't have choices. So adverse childhood experiences is right there. Boom. Like that is the most well-known one right there. But it's just surprising to me so much that, people don't know about it. And obviously the A study itself stands for the adverse childhood experiences. And if you do any research on this was funded and conducted by the Centers of Disease Control. And it's just fascinating, right? And then they stopped funding it in 2015 on the subsequent research and experiences that they're finding within their research, because they started to realize that this is the root cause of where illness starts. Like they just realized, and that's just notorious of what the CDC does. I'm not this conspiratorial person at all, but I'm like, just follow the money, right? Yeah. Follow the money. So the funding specifically of this stopped in 2015. And this study, the A study, was done in 1995 through 97, right? And it was surveyed through 17,000 participants and asked them their experiences about childhood adversity, including physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and household dysfunctions like substance abuse, mental illness, divorce, and incarceration, to shape a child's life and how they're going to project themselves into adulthood. Like, if you guys do not know, anybody that's listening to this, look up the A study. It was done, it was spearheaded by Dr. Stephen Folletti, and he had a team of physicians that surveyed this for over 3 years, like all sociodynamics and all different aspects. So they just made sure that nobody, was missed through this study. And it found that 87% of people that they studied had at least one. And one is enough to tip the limbic system and the neocortex out of alignment to perpetuate the body just living on survival stress hormones. And that's what's really fascinating, is that once you start to get into that, then imagine if you're a child, right? And you're going through survival, and then you get up to older. There's so many people that I've worked with in our facilitation that cannot remember their childhood. And these are known as adverse non-declarative experiences, or ANDLs, right? So you remember the conscious mind, very, very futile. It's like the pin light. It has more power than you can actually imagine, but people don't know how to tap into it, right? So you have 0.006 to 5% of our mind that is rational and declarative in nature, right? And what's really challenging is that people can't remember things. And that's the reason why we're a lineage of experiences. People don't realize we're just memories compounded on top of each other. And through this emotional quotient of experiences and this just longevity of emotionality, it becomes tough to remember things, right? And then there's studies out there that shows that 50% of what we actually think we remember, we just make up to embellish details to make ourselves feel better about what's happened. So we just kind of compartmentalize ourselves within this reasoning that's not even true. We're essentially lying to ourselves.
So true.
Right. And that's what's really challenging, is that's why we have to talk to the mainframe through psychosomatic dialogue, through our subconscious dynamic sessions, to see the earliest imprint, because then the identity, the rational mind, the declarative mind isn't there. So once we clear out that charge from an emotional standpoint, it doesn't have hostage. It doesn't bear any of those thorns in the side, kind of effect that has from, what we deem as trauma. And this is where we really start to focus on children, more so than ever, and parents through the education, is because the sixth type of trauma is adverse babyhood experiences, or ABES, right? We always love acronyms and analogies because that's how kids learn, right?
Yeah.
To keep it very simple, because a lot of people come in and they're just like, wow, these words, it's a lot. It's like, let's be honest here. The words, the reason why it's challenging for people to understand is because that's why science put them there. The words there are from the science, right? But if you come in and you simplify the education, we can just tell you what it is without having to go through all these giant words and try to break it down for you. Like anybody trying to go through quantum physics and trying to corroborate that and correlate that with childhood development, very good luck. It's a lifelong endeavor. So we want to make sure that we understand these adverse babyhood experiences, what's happening from birth to 2 years old. There's more neurological patchwork and development happening in the system than any other time on the planet. Right. You have more connections happening during that time than any other time. So it is crucial, because you remember, when you are in full delta, you're in full programming.
Yeah.
And a baby from 0 to 2 is almost in full delta, right? You're modulating in, out of delta and theta, but mostly in delta. And that's the reason why statistically, a child itself, a baby from ages of 0 to 2, has a hard time staying awake for more than 7 minutes at a time. That's why they're constantly sleeping. So once you start to see these things, and this can happen, from C-sections, this can happen from, long-term medical interventions, this can happen from domestic violence and work-related stress during pregnancy.
Vaccines even too, I'm sure.
100%. Absolutely. I mean, probably in the sensory field, from toxicology, the most adverse thing that you can do to a child is inject them literally through their arms. And there's a lot of debate out there if we did proper vaccine administration orally. So the cell can actually start to create its own defense mechanisms through the tonsils, right? Because that's what the tonsils do. They start to signal the cells or the physiological defenses of the body. And that's why it's fascinating that people get their tonsils taken out. Like, go figure, right? But your tonsils are there to help your entire body. It's like the armada, going into the bay, and it's like, we're trying to defend the system. So that's why from ages of 0 to 2, I always, if you look at a lot of our curriculum, that's the one that I focus on the most. And what really, and this is also fascinating because a lot of people don't talk about this too, what can be really, really challenging, especially for parents out there that do have twins. And this happened to my grandmother because I was named after Kyle Trautmann, right? And he was a little baby boy, a little bundle of joy, but didn't get to make it, right? He passed away in infancy. I believe it was like a few days or so. And that just did detriment to my grandmother. My grandmother actually developed Alzheimer's because of this loss of a child, that connection from 0 to 2. Yeah. And what's really fascinating through this process, what can happen to a child is a loss of a twin. Like, imagine what that does to the neurology of the other child and the parent, and how that correlates too. So that is a massive one that a lot of people don't pay attention to, because that's an adversity in itself. And to wrap this up, like this is the stickiest of them, is the adverse multi-generational experience. We've found through our research and science that they've done on worms that adversity in lineage can live up to 14 generations to initiate risk for chronic illnesses, disease. And that can compound on adverse babyhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences, and adverse life experiences as well. And through my sessions that I've worked with people, we've gotten up to an extension of 52 generations. So the science is there to give us metrics, right? That's Newtonian physics. But when you are in internal time, which is subconscious laden, that's quantum physics. There is no time. So you can go back as far as the measurement goes from consciousness, because consciousness is non-local. So again, those are the 7 types of trauma that we really focus on. And 7 is the number of completeness. So you can educate yourself on that number and that numerical value. And once you have those all taken care of, you get wholeness back in the system. And wholeness is the highest emotional frequency that we know to mankind right now. So yeah, that's the
that multi-generational, that is, when you think about it, it's like how 10 generations back, like you're saying 52, it all affects, and that's one of the things, I love, about the permaculture principles, right? It's always looking forward, right? Like what I do now is going to affect how many generations forward. And so doing it intentionally, right? And so when we bring even just that into our being and our daily lives, we get to be more conscious, with how we're showing up, right? And what we're doing and our actions when we know it doesn't just affect right now, it affects who knows
What's really beautiful about what you're talking about is if you break it down, and we've known this since the 30s, like we are long range frequency modulators. So imagine you have all this collective conflict, specifically from ancestral aspects, and then also your time frame. It's just bogging down a system. It's like downloading too many things on a phone way too fucking fast, right? And what happens to the phone? What happens to the phone? It starts jamming. It starts. Yep. And so that's what your body does. Right. So now, and then you add in the environmental toxicity, you have a cesspool for a marketplace known as the pharmaceutical industry that is just going to be like, hey, this is easy. Like this is easy to be able to give this solution without people actually looking internal, that it's all conflict, it's all experiential, it's all memory based that is harbored within the nervous system. And once we clear that out, you don't need anything exogenously. Obviously, you need some here and there maintenance, as we call food and nutrition and certain things, depending on what your goals are. But once the nervous system is cleared from the harbored emotional impact, or what we call shock, and what they call shock in German New Medicine, it starts to alleviate the symptoms, right? And that's when you go to the root. And if you ever look at neurons, under microscopy, they just look like mycelium. It's the same thing. They're just spreading around. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. And I believe that's what the neurons are for us when we start to study this from more of not just a scientific, but just really conscious forward aspect, is that it is the root system of all things possible, because that's exactly what is communicating it. If you looked at the mycelium in the root system, it's just communicating the nutrient delivery, all the sensory experience that's happening underneath the hood, right? So that's what's happening neurologically. And when we take care of the neurology will take care of us. And it's the most benevolent, most loving, most forgiving, most beautiful thing that we've ever experienced once we create that partnership.
Well, and what I hear you saying too is so much to, what's been talking about over the last few years, especially, is the terrain, right? We're taking care of our terrain. So then we're not looking at the external to either harm us or help us truly, right? Like it's not that, like you're saying, some maintenance and whatnot, but it's focusing again, as within, right? Like it's focusing here and clearing that out. And and I mean, I know even, through these last however many years, like you can be around people that are sick. Don't get sick. You know what I mean? It's like, okay. So, I like it that Wayne Dyer said this years ago before he passed. I love him and just his teachings and stuff. But he was saying, like, if he's like, what happens when somebody squeezes you? What comes out? He's like, just like when you squeeze a grapefruit, what comes out of that grapefruit? You don't get orange juice. You get grapefruit juice. Right. So what squeezes you, like when you feel squeezed by life, does anger come out? Does fear come out? What comes out of you? Because that is then what we have to look at, like within ourselves, and we can't pretend it's orange juice when it's, you know what I mean? Or love and light when it's there's some anger, there's some stuff that's going on that I really need to take a look at here, and I really need to clear out and heal, and so that I can show up differently as well
And
too.
I love that notion too, because one of the biggest things that I've found, even just through our market research and just also through my facilitation, is that we work with a lot of practitioners. We work with a lot of people that are in the healing industry because people are looking for something that's not just root based, right? Because we don't want to sit there and just give you market words, right? Where anybody can be like, oh, the root cause, bro. So functional medicine does that shit all the time, right? But now when we actually start to realize people are out here, you can see their heart, you can see what they're really trying to do and really trying to express and help people. And then when they get into these facilitations, they're full blown crying in their core beliefs because they realize this is shit that's still affecting them. But imagine when that's not there, and then the force that they get to put out into the world with that empowerment that's not egoic in basis. And it's not defined by the titles that this world is continuously given to people, right? Where it's like, oh, you're the spiritual bypasser or the narcissist. I'm not saying that those aren't things that are possible, but I mean, these are overused terms to just play the victim. And when we play the victim, it's just essentially saying, I had no responsibility for any of this shit. But when you realize that you have to take full ownership and responsibility for every single fucking detail of your life, that's freedom. And it's not about this material game. It's about freedom. And you don't have autonomy within your body unless there's sovereignty in your mind. And those all equate to freedom, right? And we focus on those core 4 emotional states of the practicum, which literally is wholeness, bliss, love, and freedom. Those are the 4 highest emotional frequencies that we have documented through our extensive research that we know of. So what else are we focused on? Everybody's like, oh, I want to be happy and healthy. I'm like, well, fuck that. Why don't you be blissful? Because that it already encapsulates happiness, and you're already going to be healthy if you're whole and bliss. You know what I mean? Like we always say, if you're going to go shoot for the highest possible oscillation and vibration that you can, because if you're in that state, literally, what else can you really try to come up with? Right? What else can you start to define? And I know from my experience and also the people that work with me, when they get to that place, all they want to do is just give back and help people. And that's what we're here to truly do. We're here to serve people, and we're here to serve the planet. And we just have to get better at doing that. Right? And when the more conversations like this, the more extensions like this is what neurons do. They extend, they fire, they go out and they try to connect. This is why connection is so important. And trust me, I don't know how much time it's going to take, because obviously in the quantum model reality, there is no time, but I'm praying that, more people rise up within, like you said, these next 18 months, and there's more connections like this, and there's more developed and functional and foundational change. And there's just more love to be given. Like that's all at the end of the day. Right.
I love that. You speak of service, that we're here to, really serve. And so I want to ask you, who do you love to serve? What's the type of person that is your ideal person to serve, that you're like, yes, this is the person that is like awesome. I'm so excited to work with.
Yeah, one of my favorite questions. I mean, one of my mentors was Kobe Bryant. So I have that very tenacious mentality. So we call them gassers or closers. So people that are just like, it doesn't matter what's happening in my life, I'm going to get this done. I have a commitment and a devotion beyond my senses, because anybody can wake up and have a stomach ache or feel defeated and be like, I want to quit. I was like, I don't want to work with those people, right? Like, I want you to be so enthralled by the fact that you get to exist, right? Like after my near-death experience in 2015, I was like, holy shit, like I get this life. Like this is not only just a privilege, but this is something that's not just sacred. This is something that I need to cherish for myself so I can love other people. And that is I call the Christmas morning effect, where I'm like, I'm hop skipping out of this bed because I get to be around people. I get to have connections like this. I get to really, truly figure out what is ailing people so I can get them back to the closest state of wholeness within this practicum so they can find it for themselves. Because once they find it for themselves, that's the ultimate high five for me. Because once you see them hit that level, because when people come into our practicum, it's not just the sessions, it's foundational work, right? We have like a very strong foundation of how we built. And that's the reason why our 4th iteration that we launched on January 1st of this year has 100% success rate. And we're coming up on 8 months of this. Is like, it's something that is like, it's not prideful or egoic for me to boast about, but I don't want to give up on that. And for me, that's my dedication and my devotion to people. It's like, where are you at? I'm going to pour into you. Right.
Yeah.
And then you understand people's trauma physiology, because we have to educate people on the difference between adversity, stress response, and then also what actually trauma is, because people are just throwing trauma out here like it's the holy grail, like, oh, trauma this, trauma that. And I'm like, look, guys, stop. If you're not going to educate people on what this is, you're not going to give them a better executive assigned meaning of why they're going to want to do it. But those people that are just like, yeah, I'm ready, like they clap their hands, they're just like, all right, I'm ready to eat, let's go. Those are my favorite people, but we'll work with anybody at any capacity that fits within the parameters. But like because they just want the best out of life. Like, why would you not want the best out of life? Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's it. Whatever it takes, all in. I'm going to do this because I know I'm worth it, and I'm going to fight for my worth. And I know I have other people in my life that care about me. So I'm going to do that so they can see that exemplified. And that's the principle of neuroscience of mirror neuron. And that's why it's beautiful about what you said earlier. I think that's the reason why people get sick, is like, oh, they have stuff within their physiology that's been affected. And then they see somebody else that's sick and that mirrors them. And then they start getting sick. It's not actually germs here. It's mirrored neurons. Your neurons are speaking electrically out into this world. But everything that you do has an impact on somebody else. And I always tell this to people that I work with. There's somebody out there in this world that cannot even be who they are until you're the best version of themselves, because it's a trickle down effect. And that's it. I mean, that's it. And then you look at the greatest leaders of this world, and the great shamans, the great gurus, the Jesus Christ, the biggest, names out there. And they all had this love, this deep love, but they were also tenacious as fuck. They were willing to throw it all down on the line, and they did it. Yeah. And that's what they're known for. So those are the people that I love to work with.
Well, and I think one of the things that separates the greats out from the others too is that these are the people that truly had a heart to lead people. And I know it's cliche, but it's so true. Just lead people back to themselves. Yeah. They didn't want followers. They wanted people like Krishnamurti. I love him. And like, that was one of the things for him. He didn't want anybody to follow him. He didn't want to accept awards. He's just like, no, I'm doing this. Like, this is my journey. Don't follow me. Yeah. Go find yourself. I'm just an example, but like, I don't want you to like copy me, And so I love that I think that's when you can tell a really true, teacher or guide, whatever, however we want to describe it, from, someone who's just maybe kind of walking in their own shadow of their trauma still. Right. But yeah, no, I love that. Well, thank you, Kyle, so much for being here. And I've so enjoyed this conversation. And there's like so many golden nuggets that I know people are going to like. Honestly, this is like something to listen to a couple times, to get it all, because it's so good. It's so rich, just with beautiful wisdom. But where can people find you? If there's somebody that's like, you know what, I'm ready to jump off this cliff. I just need somebody to lock arms with on the way down, because I'm ready. Where can people find you? And we'll have it in the show notes as well too. But
yeah, for sure. The basic, I'm very, very personable when it comes down to like contacting people. So I always prefer people to go to Kyle Anthony Trautmann just on my Facebook, just because that way you can actually contact me through Messenger. I'm very, very active when I'm not in session, and therefore
you are.
It's just very helpful for me, because connection to me means everything, especially if you're going to work with us. You want to have that intimacy and that connection specifically with that person, so you know who you're working with. But if you want base information of just like what we do, highvibehealing.info is our website. So that has kind of all of the breakdowns and the parameters. But I always tell people to reach out to me first, just so we can kind of see exactly like what it is that you're looking for, kind of almost like a pre-consultation. So I can kind of understand what your mindset is going forward, because if you really, really, really are just like gung-ho about change work, that's what we do. We're a one-stop shop for change. We do everything to alleviate the cell danger response, so the mitochondria can be free. And when the mitochondria can be free, they produce energy effortlessly, and energy is life. Without energy, you have nothing. So you have to understand the cellular structures, but just reach out, connect. It's going to be huge. Yep.
Well, I love that. And I can attest to that. You're very responsive on, with your messages and whatnot. And I love that. And, just going through the coaching and the program, like there's so many components of it. It's not just the sessions, like you were saying, there's so many components of it. And you really do give like so much. Like you're always like showing up and showing up. There's times I'm like, oh my God, like this guy is like, like you walk what you talk, and you walk what you talk. And it's very refreshing, in this day and age to see that and to witness that and to experience that. And so I just want to share that, like you are everything you're saying, like that's what you do, even in your sessions, that's how you come across. It's how you do every component of the coaching. There's so much more than just the one-on-ones. There's the groups, there's like, and you're always improving too. Like you're always all right, how can we make this better? How can we evolve this? And so I love that as well too. Like, like it comes from your heart and you can feel that. I mean, I can feel that. And so I just, wanted to share that as well.
I appreciate that because for us, it's an honor. Like for us to hold honor, that's just something that I built within our team, and also with myself. It's just an honor to serve. Like I'm almost getting emotional because it just is. It's just like, it's such a great feeling to just give. Like, and when you have the energy because you study it, I would hope if you're coming to work with us that you get energy too, because that's what we study and that's what we teach. But if we have energy for ourselves, we have energy to give. And that's the law of reciprocity right there. And there's no thing that I know in nature when it comes down to relations, because all things are relations that can exist without that healthy reciprocity. And we're really, I would say, hell-bent on the giving. So I really appreciate those kind words because that just bolsters the honor that we hold. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And does all come down to energy. And, that's the thing. It's like we all are subject to programming and conditioning. Nobody is exempt from that. Like, no matter if somebody's listening, like, oh, I'm good. No, like we all have experiences. And this is, maybe not everybody, I believe that not everybody's here to they're probably not listening if they're not on this journey, but, when you think about it too, like when you have all these beliefs, what it is sucking, it's like a vampiric energy, like sucking away all of this life force energy. And so when we can clear that out, like you were saying, that's the visual I got when you're like, you could just go forward and without any of these beliefs just literally like holding you back because it's sucking all that energy out, it's just draining that life force energy. It's a spiritual way of saying it. I know there's like a scientific way of like putting it, but it's how I like visualize it in my mind. And, and it's like, then it's like a rocket ship going, forth without any attachments, without anything holding you back. And man, that is when you can get out and serve in the highest capacity ever. And you're lifting everybody else up along the way. Yeah. And there's no better gig on the planet. So I love it. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for being here, and really enjoyed this conversation. And I'll have all your information in the show notes. And until next time, thank you, Kyle. Thank you. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes packed with wisdom and insights that will allow you to experience life in a more empowering way. Until then, stay inspired, stay curious, and always ask the question, what else is possible that I've never thought of before? Take care.